Alrighty. Hello everyone. Welcome back. So, Biggening Corporation. We today are going to review a little bit of what we were working on yesterday. We're also going to focus today on developing our bot templates and how editing that will work. We are going to try to aim to keep this session to about an hour. I think that'll fit well in most people's days, so we'll try to keep it to an hour from here in instead of the hour and a half we did yesterday. Okay, so first let's talk to, there was an obvious issue with what we were doing yesterday and a non-obvious issue. And as a result of that, we are going to rethink an approach, which unfortunately is a pretty common thing when we're dealing with imprecise specification. In our case, we had what we want to accomplish, but not necessarily the how. And while I had a pretty good idea of how, it did not work out. So we're going to refactor and go in a slightly different way. Our first issue that we had yesterday, and some of you who are watching very closely might have realized, the first issue should have been obvious to me, but that's my eventing adoption process still being a little slow. This triggers anytime we insert a customer. So guess what happens when we insert a customer? This trigger will run again. But the problem is that events are not company context sensitive. So not only do we have the obvious issue of we're potentially duplicating this, our trigger here and our trigger here that we should have bailed out before we get down to the repeat of doing this again will not happen. So I went ahead and updated the code a little bit just to show here in the isMaster company so that we could debug a little easier since we don't see the result of this function. I wanted to show what exactly is happening with the event, but the short of it is that when we do this company information.get, even though we've changed company to, in our earlier case, Kronos, even though we've done that change company and then the event fires, the on after insert event here, the context of the code call is not within the Kronos company. It is within our current company, which means that this doesn't help us. It also means that this does not help us. So let's look at that real quick. We'll do a debug session on this. And we'll head back into our master company friend here within the debugging context. That always helps. Okay, and we still have our nice little try function failing in the background. Because after all, the new company doesn't exist yet. Now, when we do our company insert, our first pass through, the original insert fires. We are in our master company right now. So now we're going to go ahead and loop through all of the other companies. And if we look at some of our info, well, we're back here. So if we come back up a level, if you're not used to debugging in the environment, the context of the variables is where we are in the call stack. So here we called isMaster company. By clicking back up a level, we can now see the locals up here. So we're inserting the rec, a test, and we're doing a check of is the master company true. And we can see that it is cycling through companies, in our case _master, which is our master data company. And we'll go ahead and see that if we do find the company information and master company is yes. So we know that someone has inserted a customer in the master company and we're all good. Now, however, when we start to iterate through the companies, we get to the first company in the list, company name _master. That does equal our company name, so we skip right on past that. Now we get to the second company on our list, our Cronus, and we change the company of the customer variable to that, and everything is fine. We're going to go ahead and insert the copy of the customer that we've got here. That works great. But now, of course, we trigger the true event, which means that we once again are back here inside the customer inserted, and we're calling, is this the master company? The problem here is that the current company context of this second event call, even though the insert is happening after we've changed company, is still in the context of the user session. So as a result of that, there isn't really a great solution for us here. So we'll go ahead and stop the debugger because that's useful to know. The super easy, obvious answer is we could go ahead and say false on this. I try to be very, very careful about ever doing insert false. You need to know really, really well that there are no validations that are going to be affected by you creating a customer record that won't cause any harm. I don't know that. So I cannot trust that this is an acceptable solution. For example, if you were doing this in a customer environment, they might have some things in place that apply templates to customers when they're inserted. They may have some extensions that create setup records related to a customer. And by doing insert false, which is an option, you circumvent any of those triggers. So it is incredibly, incredibly dangerous to do insert falses if you don't know exactly everything that happens as a result of calling this insert. So with that realization in mind, that we are, even within the event context, not working with the current company, based on our change company call, made me realize that we're going to need to refactor our approach to that. The intention behind this, the goal of what was this accomplishing, was that we were going to have a master company where we set up data that gets pushed and maintained in all of our other companies based on the fact that we've made those changes. So since we know that validations need to happen, but we cannot push these across the company walls, we're going to take a different approach a little later on to creating ways by which we can go ahead and maintain this data and push these pieces of data, but not doing that off of an automatic process. And I think that'll help us with the maintenance of the data, but do so in a way that will be event safe and context safe. So odds are pretty good this code unit is going to go bye-bye. I don't think this is what we need to do as a solution. A quick rundown of the things that we know we are going to need to have. Just as a quick review, we know for sure we're going to need GL accounts. We need things called general business posting groups. We need general product posting groups. And we need general posting setups. We are also going to need things like customer posting groups. We'll probably want to have customer discount groups. We're going to need payment terms. We're definitely going to need vendor posting groups. And then a little later on, we will need something a little odd. We're going to need inventory posting groups, and per location the player makes, we need inventory posting setups. The original layout of the code unit, my thinking was that we would go ahead and we'd bring customer, vendor, item, unit of measure, all that information across the barrier as we set them up. It's not a bad idea, but I think for the sake of having fun with the discovery, that we are going to hook into the bot purchasing process, generating those on demand from a randomized list. I think that'll be, from a player perspective, more fun because each season you're going to get randomized results per your bots as to what exactly are you unlocking. So I think we'll have a lot of fun with that. There's some different services that are out there that we're going to use to create a data source to pull names from, just to make it nice and silly and safe. But we definitely know we're going to need some of this information. So, yeah, we'll have to do some work around that. For now, since we are going to need to close the books on this code unit for now, we'll go ahead and save those changes. It's fine. We're going to delete that out a little later. We are going to swing back to our bot templates because that we know for sure we're going to need. Now, bots, we talked about in our specification in episode 1 here. They come in lots of different types, but they are going to have some shared attributes, and they're going to have some attributes possibly per type. So, knowing how we're going to make the gameplay of this work, what are some of the different things that we know bots are going to have? Well, across all of these types, we know that we're going to make the player purchase each type, so it's going to have a base purchasing cost. We may make that vary based on how many someone has. We may make that vary based on the type. But in the end, there will be at least a base starter price. We may go ahead and add some function calls to do multipliers to that later. I think it would make a lot of sense and a lot of fun that, as we progress through the game, maybe the first 10 bots cost 1,000, and then once we've hit the 11th bot, the company goes, oh, we can charge this person a little more, or maybe a little less. So we can play around with that and see what the game balance thinks. But one of the main cost factors of the game is going to be how much power we're spending on each day. So we know per day that each bot will have a power cost. Each of the bots is fulfilling a different role within the organization. And if we think about it from the perspective of operations per game day, we can see that that would work across all of these. We could fulfill, create and post sales orders, create and post purchase orders, ship, do picking and shipping operations, do assembly operations, do manufacturing operations, research operations, and maybe even marketing operations. So operations per day is probably how we'll measure the bot output. So those are our shared data types. So let's go ahead and make a new field. Let's see here. That's interesting that this template defaults to blob. Sure. All right, so we are going to have a base price that we can configure per bot, and we'll make that decimal. I suspect we'll probably keep it to a currency that is 0 decimal places, but we might as well have it be decimal for now. That'll support some pretty large numbers as well. But we'll go ahead and say decimal places on this is equal 0 at a minimum, 0 at a maximum. So nice and easy. This will keep us nice and tidy when we're looking at the UI on that. And I think, yes, let's do this. If it's not filled in on a card or a list, I like it to show blank. I think that will look pretty nice for us. It'll make it stand out that that's not filled in. And I forgot caption on that, but we'll get to that. Let's leave ourselves some room in this series here. And we were going to do power per day. And we'll go ahead and we'll call that base power per day. because maybe later we'll add a system where that can be unlocked research, where we could reduce the amount of power per day. I think that'll be a fun game possibility here. Base price. And again, I have not turned on translations yet. I want to show a few episodes in the impact of not doing that and how much work it kind of adds to things if you don't maintain that as you go. But for now, we'll just go ahead and we're going to keep things simple, and the captions are going to match the field names. And same thing here, base operations per day, which I may caption-wise abbreviate to ops per day, because why not? I think it'll fit better into a column header. Base operations per day. Okay, so fantastic. So for each of our bot templates, we'll have the code of what type it is, what type it is, maybe a description in case we want to have some notes about it, and then base price power per day, base operations per day. So those, I think, are all of the unified attributes that we can really work with. Now, there aren't a whole lot of special per type attributes in the design of this I have just yet. The only real special thinking on this so far is just whether or not a bot is a basic logistic versus advanced logistic, but we handled that in our enum. Inventory basic, inventory advanced. Which, if you did not follow along yesterday, we created an extensible enum for the types rather than a setup table, just to play with them. We haven't used it much. We'll be able to use that that type list elsewhere. Okay, so that's it for now, and we'll see as we play with game design, game balance, what sort of special fields that we will eventually begin to develop for the different specialized bot types. But for now, I think these three are our main measures. So that's good. Right. And since we created the page using the wizard yesterday, we now need to manually add our fields, which I'm going to be nice and lazy. We'll copy and paste these down. Base power per day, great. And base operations per day. Fantastic. Now, for the moment, that's a small enough field list that there's no benefit to creating a specific card to edit these. So we'll just continue to have that as an editable list for now, and we'll be okay with that. All right, fantastic. So, there we go. We're going to next think a little bit about creating some of the things that we're going to need for infrastructure. We knew, for example, that we're going to need a system manager dashboard, a role center, and we're going to need player role center. The advantage to us starting this right now is that we can go ahead and create the new role center for the system manager so that the system manager can easily go edit these bot templates. And that's also going to be a place where we're going to come back to some of our setup management. Yeah, so let's create some new role centers. And for me, I am going to specifically make a little folder for our role centers. You do not have to do this. This is very stylistic. It often is per project how you structure things. Sometimes you might do different folders for different modules if an extension is large enough, and then do maybe a shared component where anytime you modify system tables or application tables that are part of the base app, you may want to have those all be in one place. So there's a lot of different structures, and I know that that's still something we as an industry are kind of unifying around. How do we want to structure these? Here and there are some things chatting about how to do that, but so far I haven't seen a consistent way that would work for all scenarios. Okay, so now by default it's going to hand us the next page number. I am going to go ahead and jump in my numbering series. It doesn't really matter too much for how we're using this. Again, page numbers are not going to be heavily utilized, so we'll go ahead and do that. BCS System Manager Role Center. Cool. So we'll go ahead and call that a System Manager. And now, thanks to the AL template we've been given, there's an example headline, there's an activities area, and all the different parts that we might expect to see for some things. You can see there's lots of errors because this is just a template and it's pointing to some different potential things we might want, like actions for create and actions for process. So let's go look at our role center for a moment and we'll discard those changes. So if you're not familiar with designing a role center in the web world of Dynamics BC, we have a headline component up here, which could potentially show us kind of new system news in a way. We have all of our action ribbon up top. We've got separate role center actions here. And then below we've got some activities with these queue-style stacks, as well as some insights, chart parts, Power BI integrations, reporting box, those sort of things. And so this default role center template is reflecting some of that. So for example, we can see headline, the activities, help, reporting box, Power BI spinner. We're not going to use a lot of those, and we'll bring them back as we need them. Here in the actions, this will drive what is going to go up in the top ribbon. So for example, different groups like reporting versus processing, that would be some of these different options up here. So yeah, we are going to keep it nice and simple and very small for now. Let's see here. You know, I have to say, Walnut, that's a really good list of stuff to have in your extension. It's a very beautiful role center template. I feel bad almost removing lots of it because we're not going to make use of it for now. So for example, headline, we can skip that for the moment. Eventually, we're going to want to have those because I think it'll be a great place to show season info and standings and things like that. Some highlight info. Let's go ahead real quick and save this, even though it's got lots of problems. This is looking for activities parts that we have not made yet. So we are going to, for the moment, if you don't know, you can toggle block comments with that, and that just flags that out of there entirely. So right now, based on this layout, there's nothing. We have nothing on here. And then we've got the actions section. I admit for the different areas of actions for Role Center, I'm not super familiar with how all these different parts play out. So for example, creation, processing, embedding, I'm going to go ahead and guess that that relates directly to these drop downs up here. So that's cool. Let's go ahead then, and I'm going to create our own new one area. And we'll go ahead and do this one as setup. I think there is a setup down below, so we're going to need to remove that. Yeah, there is. And it's pointing at a lot of different assisted setups and things like that. So let's... Aha, I see. Area, sections, and then group of setup. Let's go ahead and just pull these on out for the moment. And we are going to go ahead and point this to our bot template list. And we'll just call it bot templates. Oh, well, it would make sense if we did that where we could name it. There we go. And I'm not going to have manual setup for the moment, and we don't need to worry about service connections for the moment. I'm going to leave assisted setup in there just for our reference. And there we go. So we have an extremely bare bones role center where we have some different work to do around things like creating some activities. But that should be good for now. When you create a new role center, the object exists, but it is not immediately available for us to select from. So when we go into my settings, I believe this available role list is still driven from setup. Let's check if that's true. Oh, interesting. It may finally be dynamically updated. Once upon a time, there was a setup table where you would have to go define the profile and connect it to a role center. So let's see what happens when we go ahead and publish this. BC System Manager for Biggening Corporation System Manager. So if we go ahead and publish that, sending its little publishing request, and we're all good. Something I am not doing, but you would need to pay attention to, I am not currently bumping up the version in the app JSON. When we're dealing with producing something for a production environment, possibly even in testing environment, people have different rules on how they handle versioning numbers. So any organization you work with, definitely have a discussion about what you're supposed to be doing there. Some companies might, for example, bump up the last decimal every single time you make a change so that you can clearly have an idea of what version is in an environment. If we go look at the extension list, and we put this into list form here, we can see that version number. If I was incrementing the app JSON, we'd have a whole long list of Biggening Corporation engines, and we could see which version is in place. So do be aware and careful about the fact that the version number, what your organization uses for a policy around that. Okay. So what we were doing was we were theoretically going to try to change to our new role center, which I'll be surprised if that's here. I do not see it, so let's double check here. Caption BC System Manager. Okay. Yep. Let's see. That's what I thought. Okay. So that is still in place. There is a profile page where you set up different profiles and you have to point at what role center ID and whether or not it's a default profile for new users and whether or not that should be shown. Yep, and someone commenting in chat there that, yep, this table's definitely still here, and that you need to add the profile via AL. That is true. And one of the things that you can do is with extensions, you can create code that runs when this is deployed into a system on the database level and on the company level. So an option that is open to you is during that install trigger, you could go ahead and create or update this profile automatically. So that's pretty nice. Okay, and our ID, one of the few times that page numbers really do matter. Come on in here. As far as a setup is concerned, we'll go ahead and say it's enabled, and we'll show that in Role Explorer. That's just fine. We are not going to use this as a... okay. So, a little bit different for app source. True enough. Thankfully, I do not intend to develop this solution to be app source compatible. That is a world of fun that I don't want to try to do live. I've done it, but it's not fun. I don't need to disable personalization, so we're okay there. Of course, with any of these things, there is lots of documentation. If you haven't already stumbled into the docs section of Microsoft, definitely spend some time there. And if you are finding yourself confused by the documentation, there are lots of great forums for Business Central you should always consider going to. Or if there's something unclear about the document itself, at the bottom of every page, there is usually a way you can create an issue to ask clarification, and the documentation team is very sharp and pretty fast at responding to issues with that. So, yeah, something, whoops, we do not need to design. My settings. Clicking while I'm thinking. Always good stuff. Okay, so System Manager. This should be our new Role Center, which is not going to have much of anything. Exciting. Okay, that may be simply because we, well, frankly, didn't make much of an extension. That's not very good Role Center at this point. It may be having an issue with the fact that we haven't put any content in the Role Center area before, which I admit I hadn't tried before. It's interesting to me that throws an error. I would want it to, so that's fine. But we can see we do get our setup bot templates here, so we can get to where we're going to. So it is definitely in our interest to develop the Role Center here, because this Welcome to Business Central isn't going to help very much. But that gets us a start. So, okay, we had talked about these are some of the areas of which we're going to need to be able to more easily duplicate across all of the different companies and maintain across the companies. So my thinking on the infrastructure for this is that we are going to have a setup page for our system manager that for each of the companies in the system will lay these out as columns on our counts, so we can see at a glance if everyone is all up to date and synchronized. And that way, when we're doing our system administrative work later of when you set up new companies for new players who are joining up, then we'll just see zeros across the board, and we know that there's an action that we'll need to take. We also have the advantage of these being setup tables. There's not a lot of in our game-based environment, there's not validation hooks that are going to be worrisome from an eventing perspective. So we should be able to more easily push across the company barrier some of these different pieces without worrying about violating some business logic or anything like that. So I obviously would not recommend doing that in a production environment, the way I would handle this in a production environment is I would set up some sort of routine that would run in each of the destination companies using the job queue to go fetch the information from master. So that way the code context that we're running that duplication from is where we're trying to bring the information to. If you're trying to do intercompany things, that's pretty much the business logic flow you always need to be thinking about bringing data across the companies. The initiation should always be the destination. So whether the user is pushing the button, whether you're doing a job queue type situation where you're bringing data across company walls, you should always be initiating that from where you're trying to get the data to. The weird thing here that we're dealing with is that we're trying to do it from master out to lots of entities. So a little strange, but that's okay. Since this last one here is per location, we are not going to worry about managing that one just now, but we will go ahead and bring this list over. So we're going to create a new page in our master company here, and we're not going to use our spiffy wizard as much as I would love to. And we're going to make a new page list, which, yeah, I figured that there would be a nice template for that. Okay, so we're going to call this BCS Setup Overview. Now we're going to base this off of the company table. And our first field here will be, for sanity's sake, we'll go with display name, I think, on that one. Great. And so we can see exactly what we're trying to make here. We'll bring over our list, so that way we don't have to go somewhere else. Now, what I'm going to do is create an array of integers that will be the counts of each of these setup tables per the destination company. So we, for now, will leave this default little action here because we will eventually want to have an action that will push the information out to the selected company. Potentially an action that will do that to all companies. But we need a new variable section. There are lots of different ways we could do this. I'm choosing to use an array of integers. When we start to get into arrays, there are things like dictionaries, lists, and a few other really cool things that are relatively new to BC. But because we're just going for a simple number display, an integer array feels fine. So we are going to go setup table counts. Which I believe we need to, yeah, perfect. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, call it 9. Array. Okay. And we're going to create a new local procedure. Get setup counts. Which we are going to call on after get record. Okay. So, for the moment, generally speaking, in triggers, I try to only call other procedures. Very stylistic thing that varies based on how people do things. If for some reason later I needed to be able to get the setup count information outside of this page, I could then go ahead and simply remove the local and expose that to other elements of the program, whereas if I had it in on after get record, all of the logic would have to be moved out to a different procedure. So just a stylistic thing. Okay, and here in our get setup counts, this is also a place where we need this info. So I'm just going to borrow it down here for a moment. Because we are going to need some variables to refer to all of those tables. GL account. I cannot tell you how much I am very happy for the IntelliSense. General Business Posting Group. At some point in time, we might, for fun, just do a episode where we talk a little bit about comparing how things are to how things were. Some of the old school folks would know how much fun it was trying to wade through the F5 menu for symbols. And just being thorough here, just keeping it in the exact same order so that we don't confuse ourselves later, which disk groups. The customer discount group is a maybe. I'm thinking about that for some of the marketing bot part of the system a little later on. It'll be a really easy way to do campaigns, so. And if you haven't worked with the special pricing module, then you'll see in that exciting episode. And finally, inventory posting groups. Okay. Alrighty. As mentioned, because the inventory posting setups is per location, I'm going to go ahead and skip that for now. We'll handle that when we get to the inventory purchasing side of the player experience, because what we'll need to do is we'll need to generate some of that information at that moment in time. If you are not familiar with some of the let's go to, sales order processor is fine. We'll go to Cronus. If you're not familiar with the posting setups and posting groups, and this is your first time hearing people kind of chitter-chatter about them, which if you're new to the Business Central world, it might be. So, the general posting setups and a bunch of these different things drive when you deal with a particular type of customer via the business posting group, and you sell them a particular product via the product posting group, that particular item, maybe it's a raw material, when the financials get recorded to the accounting side of the system, what GL accounts are going to be involved. And the same is true for the location setup. So for example, the inventory posting setup, when we add raw materials, for example, raw material type items to the blue warehouse, which inventory account should that hit versus the green warehouse? So we can have different inventory accounts based on each location, which we may end up doing. So we're going to hold off on adding that to our setup world for now. Now, when we are back here and we're doing our get setup counts, we've set up all the variables but we need to go ahead and clear our setup table counts. We're going to be displaying the values. So each time we do on after get record, we want to make sure that starts with all of them at 0. Very easy to goof that up. And specifically, we're going to create a variable here to say which company are we going to get the info for. So we're going to get the setup counts for a given company, which I believe, oh, interesting, name is 30. Okay, so we'll go ahead and match. Always good to be consistent. They may go ahead and expand that at some point in the future, in which case we'd need to expand that or we'll get into trouble. So now we can do jail account, change company to which company, and in the case of our setup table counts, our first value equals jail account dot count. We could do count approximate, but we're going to be dealing with a handful of records for each of these tables, not hundreds of thousands. When we're dealing with looking through item transactions and ledger entries for companies that have been running for a long time, setting the filters and saying count approx is usually okay. SQL Server gives a lot of data. In this case, I need to know very precisely exactly what's going on. So we'll go ahead and do the setup account, do the setup to equal the count. So, okay. So, and now we just get to repeat. We could go ahead and do silly things like functionize this, so that way we don't have to have repetitive code and pass a record ref of each of these to a function and say which position in setup table counts, but I don't really think that's necessary for this. Just feels like it would be overkill. So instead we'll have a little bit of boring code work. So now we can do this 7 more times. Let's go ahead and okay. So if I was going to need to do this for hundreds of different types, you betcha I would be doing this in a very different way. I would probably be using a temporary table and doing it based off of the table ID. There are a lot more elaborate ways that would be more appropriate if it were a longer list. There are also shortcuts that we could take from a development perspective if there was no other choice, that we had to have some giant piece of code like this. We could do fun things like using Excel and concatenate and copy and paste and changing the line feeds and things like that. So we could really streamline this so that way we're maximizing our laziness. But for now, this will work okay. We're almost done now. There's a couple of fantastic comics out there that talk about why do something that will take 10-15 minutes when you can spend 6 hours automating it. Okay, there we go. For visual clarity, we'll declutter our little chunk of somewhat ugly code. But there we go. So now we should be going through each of the key setup tables and getting some records for all of those. And now we come back up here and we're just going to go ahead and create the matching fields to display each of those columns, and we'll pull that from our array. So we could also do, if we were trying to be extremely multi-language friendly, we could do things like having the caption for each of these be pulled programmatically from the caption of the table involved. We could we're not going to. A little too much work for what we're trying to do here today. Okay. So, and out of habit was trying to pull from a field name. That's not going to get us very far. Okay, and this is an array. So there we go. Okay, so the field on that will be coming from our array of things, and the caption on this will be Jellicate. Okay. This first piece, for those who are new to development in Business Central, the first piece is the programmatical name of this field. So it is referred to in code by whatever you name it here. So we could have the exact same values on the page named something else, literally. And we could programmatically refer to them separately, controlling visibility for them separately, those sort of things. We don't need to. So we're going to do general business posting. So this is another example of we could automate it, but by the time we were even close to automating it, we could have all just done the work. Now, for a little bit of visual efficiency, my screen is scrunched down to make this a little friendly for display on streaming, but we can scooch things around, crunch up the left a little bit, and we can split this to the right, which will let me have this nice easy shortcut list here, and we can use our tape record variable names for the field names, and then we can go ahead and do that right down the line, so we're not spending lots of time just having you watch me attempt to type. And one more. Great. And then we can do the same thing using the names we typed over in the notepad section here. There are lots of ways to automate things, but not really needed for just 10 items. Okay, so good stuff. And there we go. So nice enough. We now no longer have any problems being reported, which we'll want that view back. There we go. If you accidentally close things in Visual Studio Code, they're usually just hiding up here under View. For example, if we just wanted a little more screen real estate, we can just close the Explorer off to the left here by clicking it again. But that's fine. We're okay now. All right. So we now have our nice setup overview page, which that looks pretty good. So what we should now be able to do is publish that and take a look and see what our counts are. We're going to add one more little thing because I think it's of benefit, which first of all, we're also going to get rid of our comment because that clutters things up. We are going to also add the flag of master company, just so that way we can say set that. And I think I'll do the same way. We could go ahead and we're just set it via function here, but I am going to have it be a variable. And again, I'm always a fan of wrap it in a procedure and then call it from on after get record is master company, And we can copy that. This is on the company information table. Great. So we could, in this case, return a Boolean and then just bind directly to the function call. But I'm going to set a variable just in case for some reason I will want to use that variable later, which, not to be too spoilery, but I will want to. So there we are. Master company. We'll assume it's not, and then if in the target company, still getting used to which times it'll give me the parentheses and which times it won't. Okay. If we manage to get a company information record, then we'll set master company to equal. Yep. And we don't need else because we've already set it to false, actually. So there we go. Okay. Fantastic. The reason for why am I assigning this to a variable is later in the actions we can set an action to be enabled or disabled based on whether or not the record selected is a master company. So that'll be good to have. And we'll go ahead, copy that on down. Perfect. Okay. Great. Now we've got this as a setup overview. We can go ahead and add that, for example, to our sections here. I believe I can add that as a part directly to the role center. So let's give that a try, because that'll give us a nice role center level view of how are we doing on setting up everything. I believe we can do lists on the role center without issue still. Interesting. Perhaps not. I wonder if it has to be a list part. Let's test this. If we make you a list part, do you become available? Yep. So that's interesting. Okay. So we would have to decide, do we want to have that just as a role center part, or do we want to have that as a separate list? For now, I'm going to go ahead and have that be on the role center itself. And I'm not going to be making use of, throughout most of this tutorial, doing anything with the application areas, but it's always a good idea to have this set. A list part does not have fact boxes, so now we get an error message. And it may or may not be easy to see, but there's different color coding to let you know about any errors. And I also see 1 comma, so there is 1 problem. So save that. Great. We'll go ahead and publish that. And we'll come on back here to my settings. We'll head over to our master data company and we'll use our system manager, which I might give a clear name so that it stands out a little bit from the other role centers. And now we don't get an error when we open the company, and we do also get some information about the setup that are in all of the different places. What's interesting to me is that if we look at the company setup, Kronos by default does not have a display name, so by using the display name, we have a blank value there. So we could do a couple different things. We could set the display name, we could fall back in the code, all that sort of thing. So one of the other things I hope jumped out to you while you were watching me type away at this, all of these are 4. That should be assigned to you as a developer. You have probably done something wrong. Super easy and obvious in retrospect. Didn't update the integers over here, so we pointed all of the copied and pasted to the same exact array value. If you are new to the developing world, earlier you might have gone, what does he mean? This array of 9 integers is basically one variable that is 9 separate possible integer values based on the fact that I said an array of 9. And in the BCAL world, you refer to those by number, starting with 1. Some languages start with 0. This one starts with 1. So there we are. We could absolutely do lists that are instead keyed on things like names, but we can't do it with arrays. It's going to give us an error message. There are list types that we can do that. We will probably use those throughout the series. Not at the moment, though. Before we jump over here, let's see, display name. I'm going to go ahead and leave it hooked onto display name, but in case we have an issue where the display name isn't set like this and we need it as an administrator to figure out what was going on with that, I'm going to make it possible to show the name column, but set it to not visible by default. And that way, if for some reason down the road we have a company that doesn't have a display name, we had a chance to figure out which one is it. At the moment, I've just got 2 in the database, so it's pretty easy to figure out. And that, as a developer, should seem more likely of a situation that we would have a good 300 GL accounts. In our environment, we're probably going to end up with about 40, I think, all told, something like that in my rough map. And then we're going to have some different posting groups laid out based on what we're going to do. So we're just a little bit past the hour. I'm going to kind of just real quick talk about what I'm going to make off camera for tomorrow. Is going to be setting up some of these different posting groups. Super quick, when we looked at the way we're going to handle the bots and the items and how the different levels of these sales and locations are going to work, my thinking on this is that we are going to handle things by items by class, and customers and suppliers are going to come in tiers. And there will be bots for each of those. So for example, a tier 1 bot for the sales side will be able to make a very simple sales order. And a bot tier 1 for the purchasing side will be able to make a simple purchase order. That will be just a single line sales order, and our operations per day will drive how many of those orders that they can handle. And a tier 2 will be able to put multiple items onto the same order, which will really make them a lot more powerful. And we'll see bigger supply and demand orders. That'll be good. As we talked about in the item side, we're going to do very simple buying and selling, and that to me is class 1, whether we are dealing with basic or advanced warehousing. But class 2 items are going to be assembled, made of class 1 items. And then finally, class 3 will be manufactured items that may be made out of 1 or 2. to handle a technology tree progression that things will unlock over time, we'll go ahead and tie those all together in this way that you can only handle the basic simple items in a basic location. And then once we get to assembly and manufacturing, we need to be advanced. And those need to be higher tier bots to buy and sell and all that sort of thing. And that'll tie everything nicely together. As a result of this, it'll be pretty straightforward for us to create some of the different posting groups to reflect that, so that when we're looking at our chart of accounts, we can see what sort of revenue we're making from the different class items and also from the different tiers of customers. And that'll allow our players, as they're going through the season, to kind of see, should they invest a little bit more into some tier 1 still and go ahead and upgrade more of those, and we'll be able to test out in a really more useful way. So when we come back tomorrow, I'll have some of these different posting groups all set up, and our game plan for tomorrow will be to make this action to copy those out to a player company. And then we'll swing back to our bots, and we'll make it so that our first test player will be something we can hopefully make tomorrow, and have a data repository so that way information about which bots have they bought can show up, and we'll start to develop those role centers. So thank you all again for joining us, and I look forward to seeing some of you back tomorrow. Take care.